In this video, I will debunk various popular misconceptions about the world and story of Dark Souls, some of which are entirely based on biased and incorrect notions that haters of one of the entries of the series have. I'll start by deconstructing the biggest example of this, which is the unfairly infamous transition between the Earthen Peak and the Iron Keep areas of Dark Souls 2. After the Curse of Undead was spread, time and space got convoluted. This phenomenon can be explained by analyzing the relationship between light, darkness, and the fantastical laws of the world of Dark Souls. The Curse of Undead was a mechanism commissioned by Gwyn to prolong his age of fire by fueling the sun with the souls of men. In other words, Gwyn wanted to prolong the time of day. The curse serves as a part of a soft Gnostic allegory, with Gwyn, who was deified by propaganda, representing the Demiurge, and his curse being the soul extraction mechanism. He founded a religion, the Way of White, to send missionaries beyond the upper walls of the so-called world of man, the isolated, allegorical paradise, to contaminate the plebeians with sparks of fire imbued with the curse. That is what we see happening in the opening cinematic of the first game. A maiden of the Way of White is inserting accursed sparks into the eye socket of a corpse to produce undead. As expected, most of the nobles of the world of men had no faith in Gwyn's religion, as they knew of its true nature. The high-ranking clerics of the Way of White are specifically chosen for their lack of faith. The Torolon's talismans, Torolon being a region within the world of men, do not scale with faith at all. Light is associated with the future, while dark is associated with the past. This is why we must offer human effigies in order to enter the abyss in Dark Souls 2, for instance. It is important to note, however, the distinction between the forgotten past that is literally and metaphorically buried by time, and memories. Souls are linked to memories. We can, for example, access a memory of a giant by interacting with its soul, and so on. In comparison to that, Drung Lake, a forgotten kingdom, can only be accessed by jumping into a vortex of heavy, damp darkness. Souls are, fundamentally, composed mostly of light. Light is what gives souls their lively character. After all, light, an element that is close to fire in the Aristotelian-like model the nature of Dark Souls operates under, is what brought life to the world in the first place. Memories are a part of the soul as well, which is why we can teleport through time and space by interacting with a homeward bone. A bone that belonged to an undead and is imbued with its soul and memory, or by casting the homeward miracle. There are multiple coexisting timelines, which is why we can simultaneously jump to a ruined future and create a different one as we finish the game. The conclusion of this long-winded explanation is that the player character travels through time, not only space, when exploring the lands. This is the explanation for the time of day varying from area to area. The transition from the Earthen Peak to the Iron Keep is deliberately crafted to surprise and instill a sense of wonder into the player, and is also perfectly cohesive with the logic of the game's world. The people who loudly and aggressively complained about it failed to understand that. It's also worth mentioning that that transition is far from the only instance of the game's world acting in a way that is superficially incoherent. In fact, one of the most beloved moments of Dark Souls 1 is the journey from the Great Hollow to the Ash Lake, which those same people fail to denounce as an inconsistency. The truth is, again, that the world of Dark Souls operates under esoteric laws and doesn't obey real-world logic, though that does not mean it is completely arbitrary either. Another completely erroneous idea some people have is that Dark Souls 3 is corrupted by fanservice, and that it ignores the plot developments of Dark Souls 2. That couldn't be further from the truth. The main plot point of Dark Souls 2, that not only orients the game's structure from a gameplay perspective, but also serves as its climax, conclusion, and subtext, is that the world is trapped in a cycle. And that can be explained by understanding both Gwyn's undead curse and what it means to link the fire. As Gwyn's curse drains the souls of men to fuel the sun and prolong the day, Velka's Firelink conspiracy drains the sun to call upon the night. This dualistic conflict is what truly goes on under the surface of the story of Dark Souls, and its climax is the eclipse. The sun itself mirrors those who are afflicted with the curse. Its interior was hollowed as its fire was drained by ages of firelinking. When a sovereign links the fire, his soul, which contains the essence of the thousands of beings he has slain, is reincarnated. Part of it feeds the ever-growing flame at the depths of the world, which later became known as the profaned flame, and part of it disperses through the lands. This ritual is a reenactment of the origin of life itself. Flame first appears in the bottom of the underworld and spread itself to create life. It naturally rose upwards to fulfill the cycle of night and day, which takes literal ages to start and finish. Dark Souls 2 centers around that concept, as the bearer of the curse must slay 4 beings who are reincarnations of great souls. By the faulty logic of the people who complain about Dark Souls 3, that should be considered fanservice, as it is a narrative callback to the first game. But that notion is extremely ignorant, as the themes of death, rebirth, and so on have been an integral part of the series from its inception, and both Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 brilliantly expanded upon them. In Dark Souls 3, the player again must fight beings who are reincarnations of relevant figures of the past, as it follows Dark Souls 2's story and further elaborates upon it, as any competent sequel should. I will provide a few examples of this phenomenon to substantiate my point. In Dark Souls 2, Nito's soul was reincarnated as the Rotten, who embodied Nito's nurturing character. Both Nito and the Rotten provide respite for the dead, who they treat as family. And both Nito's crypt and the Rotten's gutter feature various statues that protects the dead from desecration, a visual link connecting the two. The Rotten used to be Pharaohs, the explorer. The peoples of the lands dealt with the curse by quite literally throwing undeads down the gutter. Pharaoh's journey eventually led him to the gutter, and he felt a great deal of empathy towards the miserable creatures he found there, and decided to care for them, going as far as to abandon his ambition to explore the world. He built various traps to ensure they'd not be disturbed by invaders, and hid himself away at the very bottom of that underworld, where grateful undead held on to him, turning his body into the host of a great family, mirroring Nito, who had various skeletons holding on to him as well. He wanted to create a big family, to truly be an all-father of all of the dead. When we find Pharaohs, he has gone hollow like the meek undead he cared for. He struggles to rebuild one of his statues and gets frustrated by his inability to do so. In Dark Souls 3, the soul of Nito reincarnated as High Lord Wolnir, who embodied Nito's violent nature. Nito had the desire to spread death, and for that he had allied himself with Gwyn, acting as Allfather Lloyd, one of the pillars of Gwyn's way of white. The undead curse proliferates mainly through death. The Gravelord Paladins, whose ironic, contrasting nature is telling of the character of the Way of White, spread death far and wide, as well as the undead hunts called upon by Nito as the Allfather Lloyd. It was Nito himself who invented the Lloyd's talismans, items that impede healing, through a miasma that infects the victims of the hunt. Wolnir reflects the religious character of Nito. He wields a divine sword that can cast the wrath of the gods, and is adorned with magic golden bracelets. He also spews Nito's miasma of death and disease, and has necromantic control over the dead, calling upon them to defeat the protagonist, like Nito. In Dark Souls 2, Gwyn's soul was reincarnated as the Old Iron King, who embodied Gwyn's ambitious nature. Gwyn is an archetypal antichrist. He wanted to create his own earthly eternal paradise, himself being the immortal godlike ruler of men, and for that he presided over the world with Machiavellian cruelty, sacrificing the many for the few. This is what informs the design of the Old Iron King. He looks like Satan himself, whose other name, Lucifer, means Lightbringer. Gwyn was also known as the Lord of Light. The Iron King too was obsessed with creating a prosperous empire that would last for centuries, but his hubris caused his downfall, and as such, his kingdom melted into ruin, and was sunk by the resulting lava, a symbolic end to his rule. His death came at the hand of his own creation, a golem made of iron and animated by flame that was contaminated by the same avarice that the king suffered from. It's also interesting to note that the Iron King conducted undead hunts as well, and his paladins were skeletal pyromancers, a subtle reference to Gwyn's ties with Nito. In Dark Souls 3, Gwyn's legacy is represented by Sullivan, the overambitious man who overthrew Gwyndolin, the King of the Gods, a title which was previously held by Gwyn, and did everything in his power to restore Gwyn's Age of Fire. Sullivan bears a chunk of Gwyn's soul within him. He is likely a distant but forgotten descendant of his bloodline. The Way of White, which had been turned upside down by Gwyndolin, was acting as an asset to Velka's and Gwyndolin's Firelink conspiracy. As Sullivan dethroned him, he reforms the Way of White to restore its original purpose, which was to spread the undead curse around the world. This is why the evangelists go on pilgrimage around Lothric and leave piles of burning corpses on their wake. The same visage seen in the regions of Londor, where the Way of White is influential. They are plague spreaders. Sullivan also fought against the Firelink conspiracy by manipulating Prince Lothric, the one who was destined to become the last Lord of Cinder and Gwyndolин's successor, to inherit the flame itself, becoming the new King of the Gods, as well as the Lord of Hollows under the Eclipse. Because of Sullivan's influence, the prince that was promised chose to abandon his duty and let the world fall into ruin.
The fire-linking curse, the legacy of lords. Let it all fade into nothing.
There is an entire ending dedicated to Sullivan's burning ambition. The player can choose to betray the Firekeeper and offer the fire to the sun in a desperate attempt of regressing to the zenith of the Age of Fire. Of course, the Soul of Cinder partially incorporated Gwyn's soul as well, as he can conjure Gwyn's remembrance to fight like he once did. In Dark Souls 2, the soul of Sif reincarnated as a spider who inherited its predecessor's greedy nature, the incessant desire to become grander. Freya, the spider, managed to break free from its confinement and devour the souls of the inhabitants of the mining town of Brightstone Cove, and grew larger and larger, never satisfied with its stature. In Dark Souls 3, Sif's soul reincarnated as Osiris, the king who aims to achieve immortality and grow to dragonhood. Osiris, like Sif, has the ambition of attaining immortality, which is what motivated his obsession with dragons. Gwyn funded Sif's research of developing artificial immortality, for both he and the Pale Dragon desired it. Osiris compulsively studies the contents of his grand archives in the hopes of finding an alchemical solution to his plight. Indeed, Osiris also subtly parallels Gwyn, as the two of them are ambitious kings who dreamt of immortality. Osiris hails from Gwyn's bloodline, but his soul is more closely related to Sif's, and he embodies his character more prominently. In yet another case of dramatic irony, he ended up becoming more like the misshapen, pale drake than the dragons he aspired to emulate. To conclude this section, I'll also quickly point out that the argument that Dark Souls 2 tells an entirely separate story to the first and third games is equally unfounded. Funnily enough, I have seen it be used to both demean the second entry and to praise it by different types of people. There are no gods in Dark Souls. Humanities are, fundamentally, Dark Souls. They are the souls with a dark interior covered by a thin layer of light that those who came from the dark first bore within them, as the first flame projected life onto the shadows of the underworld. They are the primordial essence of man. Every humanoid that was not artificially produced descended from those who came from the dark, who were akin to hollows of future times. The so-called gods like Gwyn and his royal lineage were merely more soulful humans. The idea that Gwyn and his caste were gods is in-universe propaganda to deify their rule and to separate them from the plebeians, and was likely inspired by the divine right of kings of real-world history. The revelation that Gwyn is a simple man is the major plot twist of the ending of the first game. He is as vulnerable to the curse as any mortal. We confront him as a simple hollow, in a direct callback to the game's beginning. From Software loves to insert dramatic symmetries into their stories. For example, Demon Souls begins and ends at the ruins of the Mirden Empire, the ancient civilization that employs the soul arts under benevolent rule, but was later corrupted by man's avarice. Such symmetries are thematically relevant and should be carefully considered when analyzing their respective game's lore. The ending of Dark Souls 3's Ringed City DLC is also an expansion of this plot point. The Dark Souls are the souls of man, which is why Gale was cannibalizing not only the pygmies, who had Dark Souls running through their bodies, but also why he targets the player character, asking him for his Dark Soul.
What still here? Handed over that thing, your Dark Soul, for my lady's painting.
As an aside, souls are located within one's heart and flow upward through one's blood, nurturing one's brain, which is why the eyes serve as windows to the soul. The Dark Soul is found in the blood of man, and for that reason Gale consumes human flesh. He seeks to nurture his own body with its darkness, and through his sacrifice, make the pigment desired by his master, the painter. He decided to become the ultimate martyr, and through his endless struggle, a new world would be born. We end Dark Souls 1 by fighting an archetypal Antichrist, and ends Dark Souls 3 by fighting an archetypal Christ. It is true, however, that the name Dark Soul has a special meaning in universe. The ancient, crystallized soul held by Filianor, which has assumed a shape similar to that of a vagrant, a creature born out of left behind, stagnant humanities, is likely a remnant of the great soul found by the furtive pygmy, who chose to distribute it to his kin, creating humanity. This explains why it is mostly empty when we encounter it, and why its name carries heavy significance. There are no life, death, and light souls. This is a misconception based on the logic that since there is a dark soul, and since some beings exhibit distinct characteristics, there must have been 3 other unique souls that embodied other aspects of nature. The original lords found great souls buried in the soil of the underworld. Those great souls were, quite simply, enormous chunks of the first flame they managed to harvest like treasures hidden in the ground. The same is true for the great soul found by the furtive pygmy. It is factual, however, that souls are affected by the elements around them, and as such can assume different tones and have their nature warped. As previously explained, firelinking isn't a mechanism devised by Gwyn to prolong his age of fire, but the opposite. It is a mechanism devised by Velka to combat Gwyn's undead curse and drain the sun. Firelinking was deliberately advertised as a means of supporting Gwyn's hegemony, as Gwyn was viewed as a divine king to the people of Lordran, and so the vast majority of them would not be supportive of a conspiracy aimed at him. This is subtly hinted at numerous times throughout the series. The very first cutscene that plays after the player beats the tutorial of Dark Souls 1 is a major clue hidden in plain sight. A gigantic crow transports the chosen undead to the Firelink shrine, the hub for those who seek to link the fire. The design of the shrine serves as a clue as well. It is flooded by water, and near its center is a statue of Velka holding a baby, who is Gwyndolin, the mastermind who collaborates with the serpents to hold undead of all possible backgrounds within their grasp, with the aim of making each of them into an asset for the Firelink conspiracy. Velka was seen as the goddess of sin and punishment, and the undead prophecy serves as a sentence to 4 great sinners: Sith, the greedy alchemist; the other witches of Izalith, who responded to Gwyn's curse with a great sin of their own. The 4 kings, who fell into abyssal depravity, ruined their city of New Londor and invented the art of life drain. And Gwyn, the archetypal Antichrist who already has to serve as a sacrifice upon the first linking of the flame, but whose mindless body is made to eternally guard the ultimate bonfire. Gwyn's punishment is uniquely symbolic. He is sentenced to die and be reborn to fight again and again like the undead he cursed. The eclipse, which is the culmination of the Firelink conspiracy, has been foreshadowed since the first game. Gwyndolin's titles as the deity of the Dark Moon and of the Dark Sun both reference the eclipse. The design of the bonfire itself portrays the draining of the sun. The pommel of the coiled sword represents the drained, empty sun of the eclipse. Its handle and blade represents the fire being drained to the underworld, and its guard represents the earth, the world's surface, with the 4 points being symbolic of the 4 cardinal directions. The bones of undead that fuel the fire are also symbolic of the martyrdom of those who follow the prophecy, though the fire is ultimately directed at them, conversely symbolizing the true aim of the conspiracy, which is to empower man by undoing the curse. Gwendolyn is also the god of illusion, and like Velka, acts in the shadows, but unlike her, and like Gwyn, in the light as well, for he embodies both the sun and the moon, both the male and female. He serves as the new leader of the Covenant of the Knights of the Dark Moon, who punish the guilty and protects the journeying undead to ensure that they're able to link the fire. It's interesting to note that we find a ring that reverses one's gender, hidden in the Dark Moon tomb, Gwyndolin's secret hiding place, from where he commanded his knights. It's likely that he possessed that ring to perform both feminine and masculine sounding voices, to act as both himself and Velka and other deities. The Book of the Guilty was overseen by Velka, and upon her sacrifice, Gwendolyn assumes that role as well. Londor is not a distant land that's never shown in the games. Londor is the ruined land of the future, the Ashen realm that is populated by old, sickly hollows who are corralled by inheritors of Velka's will, who operates the Sable Church. The hollows of Londor travel to the past in pilgrimage to ensure the proliferation and preservation of the tradition of firelinking. The fermented darkness they harbor within them is required to produce a lord capable of inheriting the fire. That lord must have its heart darkened by their sigil, so that a void that can be filled with flame is generated. Londor is the last location we travel to in Dark Souls. It serves as an arena for the last jewel of the series. The future where Londor resides is one devoid of proper man. Only wretchedly aged, struggling hollows inhabit it. This future is so dystopian that the meek incessantly fight against each other to claim the souls of their own kin for themselves out of desperation, absorbing them through the technique of life drain. When Gale travels to Londor, he drains the souls of its remaining inhabitants to feed his own, ironically acting like the desperate hollows that inhabited the place. He was the final nail to the coffin that was Londor. The Sable Church was founded amidst this chaos by 3 sisters through their skillful fencing, which enables them to attain influence over the distressed people of Londor. They preached the salvation of all hollows, and instructed their followers to aid in the coming of their Lord. The spiky towers of the Sable Church, which are portrayed by the design of the Morion Blade, are the ornate rooftops of the sunken buildings of the past, such as the Cathedral of Anor Londo and the Lothric Castle. The Sword of Avowal, which is said to be a ceremonial sword from Londor, can be seen adorning the rooftops of the Ringed City. For the Sable Church, they are symbolic of the Lord of Hollows who will inherit the eclipse. Its blade and hilt pierce the hollowed sun, indicating the domain of the Sovereign over it. Many other named kingdoms are subtly featured in the games themselves. Examples include Vinheim, Karim, and Torreland, which are within the high walls of the world of man. Astora, which is a vast section of Lordran that contains areas such as the Darkroot Garden, the Firelink Shrine, and Nito's Catacombs. The Great Swamp, which is simply the past version of Izalith and Blightstown. Dark Souls 2 features a vast array of named kingdoms that have been buried by time, and whose infrastructures were appropriated by kingdoms that rose after. For example, Olafis is a kingdom whose territory included the Lost Bastille, and Lindelt is a kingdom whose territory included the Hades Tower of Flame. Dark Souls 3 follows this trend. For example, Faron used to be a part of Astora, more specifically, the region where Ulasil was located. Such inferences can be made by carefully examining item placements, the locations of NPCs, as well as the ties they each have with their homelands, analyzing architecture, reading item descriptions, and then connecting the dots with inductive reasoning and narrative analysis. For instance, it's not a mere coincidence that the crest of Artorias, who is implied to hail from Astora, opens a door at the Darkroot Garden and is sold by Andrew of Astora, who is situated nearby, and that Artorias himself is buried in Ulasil, his birthplace. By the way, the Andrew of Astora we meet in-game is likely a stone copy of the original blacksmith made by Velka to aid the Chosen Undead. Velka was a witch of chaos who married Gwyn to cement their alliance with the goal of defeating the dragons and conquering the world's surface. The witches of chaos were sculptors since ancient times, and both the giants and many of the demons are, in fact, artificial, golem-like, or perhaps Frankenstein's monsters-like beings created by them from the remains of dragons, archtrees, and man. We find a stone copy of Andre within Nito's catacombs, which contain various items related to Astora, and at the Darkroot Garden. Astora is the name of the territory that stretches from Izalith's End all the way to the walls that host Gwyn's World of Men. Astora is a country born out of a coalition of 4 rulers who each presided over vast territories. In a calculated show of benevolence, Gwyn gifted the 4 rulers a chunk of his great soul and the title of kings, and New Londor was built to serve as the epicenter of Astora, and became a vassal town of the so-called City of Gods, Anor Londo. As Gwyn's curse of undead began to contaminate the citizens of Astora, and even the kings themselves, they devised a selfish mechanism to counter the calamity: the art of life drain. They'd suck the life out of their own kin. This same logic can be applied to named characters. For example, Allfather Lloyd, as previously explained, is an alias and persona of Nito. Kaita is a facet of Velka. Kremel, the so-called god of struggle, is Kirk. Quela, the god of dreams, is Gwyndolin. Fina is also Gwyndolin in disguise. Gwyndolin is a master manipulator that charms and guides undead to work for his Firelink conspiracy. One of his methods of manipulation involves disguising himself with the voice-altering reversal ring and illusory magic. He poses as Guinevere to the worthy undead who journey to Anor Londo to fulfill the prophecy. It is implied, however, that his illusion of Guinevere could also stand for Fina, the goddess of love, who might be a mere persona of his fabrication. Lautrec, the embraced knight, seems to be following Fina's commands. Fina personifies what he was seeking, for he needed love, and so Gwyndolin exploited his wish in order to control him. Lautrec was the one who maimed and imprisoned Anastasia, the Firekeeper, to punish her for having spread the curse of undead under the Way of White's orders. He states that he's got pressing matters to attend above, at Anor Londo, and context clues tells us that he works for Gwyndolin. He carries souvenirs of reprisal with him, and can be found near Guinevere's chamber. His mission was to punish sinners who contributed to Gwyn's conspiracy of the curse, and it's possible that Anastasia was not the first Firekeeper he murdered, as he is first found imprisoned in a cell at a parish of the Way of White, and near him is a Firekeeper soul resting in a corpse. He was caught by the followers of the religion and imprisoned for his crime. As stated in Dark Souls 1, the gods of Anor Londo fled. Guinevere, as the daughter of Gwyn, migrated to Lothric, a younger civilization. Despite the tortured appearance she displays when we meet her, her framing still mirrors the beautiful Guinevere we see in Dark Souls 1. There are numerous connections between Guinevere and Rosaria, such as the miracle that can be transposed through her soul, Guinevere's bountiful sunlight, her role as a motherly figure to the undead who serve her, and the quest line that ends with her soul being delivered to Guinevere's chamber in Anor Londo. I will conclude this video by addressing the claim that instances of asset reuse by From Software contradicts the lore of their games. All relevant examples of asset reuse by From Software were carefully thought about, and the assets in question were cohesively integrated into the game's story and world, For instance, it might seem strange to some that Gwyn shares his team with the Moonlight Butterfly. Why would such a random boss have the same team as a godlike character? But there is a deep meaning behind that deliberate choice of asset reuse. Both the Butterfly and Gwyn are creations of Sif, the alchemist, and so the track they share serves to tie them lore-wise. For a different example, the Stray Demon, who is an expanded version of the Asylum Demon, is repurposed as a boss for the entrance to Izalith. Like other species of demons, they are Titanite sculptures brought to life by the Chaos Flame. They were created to serve as military assets to Izalith, under the pretext of a cold war between their empire and Gwyn's. The Asylum Demon guards the exit of the prison complex to prevent the Chosen Undead from fulfilling his prophecy, for that would mean the end of the Chaos Flame, as much like many of the demons it birthed, it acts as a parasite to the sun. If the sun got drained, the Chaos Flame would be vanquished alongside it, which is exactly what we see happen by the time of Dark Souls 3. And in that game, the reuse of the Stray Demon is also significant, as it portrays the downfall of the demonic empire. The Capra Demon we find as the lower Undead Burg area too serves as a gatekeeper for the main passageway to Blystown, so that the Chosen Undead is halted from reaching the Other Bell of Awakening. His reuse as an enemy of the Demon Ruins obviously takes the lore into account as well, as they were mass-produced soldiers of Izalith, and its entrance has to be protected by its military. And this is it for the video. Thank you for watching, and I hope it helped you understand the world and story of Dark Souls. My next big project that is being actively developed is a complete lore guide for the Dark Souls series. I will explain everything, leaving nothing major up to interpretation, and talk about every relevant detail, just like I did for Elden Ring and Demon's Souls. As a brief aside, there is a clear difference between mystery and absolute ambiguity, and the overarching narrative of these games isn't purely ambiguous, but enigmatic. They are like mysteries to be solved through careful study and inductive reasoning. They are like books with overarching narratives that are deliberately obscured but can be comprehensively uncovered, not world-building projects that were written with no clear narratives in mind. And speaking of those videos, they will get remade in the near future. My aim with this channel is to solve the games made by From Software to perfection, analyzing them as masterpieces of literature first and foremost. I will not rest until I've achieved the best results I possibly can.